I just want to take this opportunity to share my genuine pleasure to share the podium with Professor Mabizela, Professor Nichandama, whom I have known of and I have engaged with over some time. And I'm glad that Professor Nichandama has said she has also been a beneficiary of Professor Mabizela's leadership. It's also a classic case of paying it forward because I've also been a beneficiary of Professor Nichandama and also Dr. Maggie Maestri, among others who are some of the leading doyens within the field of community engagement. So I have been requested to basically talk about what I might term a complex topic, and I am not an expert in this topic. But as a scholar, we live on taking on some of these challenges. The social construction of race, impediment to the philosophy of Ubuntu and the cultivation of humanity, I would not have thought of race as an impediment. I would have looked at it from the perspective of pathways to enhance Ubuntu and also cultivate humanity. But that's something that we'll discuss in my presentation. We can move to the next slide. So what is my presentation outline? I will present a socio-theoretical discussion on the social construction of race. And I start from the premise that there is nothing called race, but we have something we call racism. There is no scientific basis for race, but we create ideologies, we create constructs of exclusion in terms of within the context of diversity politics and how people begin to be uncomfortable, people begin to structure othering as they engage with each other. I'm also going to contribute to the discussion on Ubuntu a little bit and see how, with the intention of basically answering the critical question of, is Ubuntu the solution to racism? Can we look, what are the lenses that Ubuntu can offer us? Some of the humanistic pathways that Ubuntu can offer us in order to really resolve or chip away at the challenge of racism. And I'm going to try and offer some recommendations, some suggestions around Ubuntu humanist pathways, which go beyond race and really look and emphasize that there is only one race, and that's the human race. So, you can move to the next slide. When we look at the whole notion around race, I emphasize that, race does not exist. It is a social construct, but the ideologies that inform this racism, is what we need to challenge. What is it that informs this? And also, how can Ubuntu, as an African philosophy, and quite well explained by Professor Nichandama, be a counter construct to the issue of diversity and some of the challenges emerging around racism? And also, how can we use community engagement frameworks as a critical responsibility for universities to engender a cultivation of humanity? How do we, and I like what Professor Mabizela mentioned in his presentation, where he speaks of students, young people having a deeper self-awareness and a profound understanding of their realities, shaping our society. And one of the foundational mechanisms that can be used for this would be within the context of community engagement. But I am a typical academic. I will reflect, but I'll also reflect from the perspective of the literature streams that I would have engaged with in terms of working on my presentation and what those literature streams say. We can move to the next slide. So when we speak of the issue of race, there's a history to race. We all know, from after from the French Revolution during the age of the Enlightenment, their key focus was there to think for yourself. So central to the Enlightenment thinking was the use and celebration of reason. There were three factors there that they really emphasized, three central themes that they really emphasized on: rationalism, empiricism, and progressivism. Now, if we look at these three factors and at the notion of dare to think for yourself, this is not something that can be encapsulated within one society. Rationality, empiricism, which speaks to issues of science and knowledge, are a characteristic and a quality of any and every society. It's not something that is specific to the European society at the time when they were enlightening, when they thought they were enlightening. What we have realized from the scholarship is that the notion of man being a rational animal did not include the African. So this resulted in a philosophical characterization where European colonization of Africa resulted in the imposition of epistemological paradigms, exported epistemological paradigms, which devalued African knowledge. There were semblances, or there were real rational practices, real empirical practices, and a real urge towards truth, knowledge, and sustainable living within the African continent. So, as a context of this as a consequence of this racialized theorizing, when you look at some of the Enlightenment thinkers like Hume, Kant, Derrida, Descartes, the implicit and explicit construct of men, of humanity, was that there was a hierarchy of colors. The hierarchy of colors represented the types and the differences within the human being: white, yellow, black, red. And as you go through the various hierarchies, you also see there's a diminishing rationality that is associated with each color. But within their logic, within their construct, whites were the only one who possessed all talents that would result in a holistic and complete human being. To such an extent that Hume mentions there never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white. So civilization was now associated with whiteness. And that necessitates and results in things like slavery, colonialism, and epistemic erasure of non-white societies. You can move to the next slide. So when we speak of race, again, definitions, these are difficult concepts. And because they're difficult concepts, they become what we might term wicked problems. Wicked in the sense that they are complex problems, highly resistant to solutions, that are characterized by high difficulty and disagreement about the cause of the problem and their potential solution. Classifying people based on their phenotype does not does not result in, is not scientifically permissible. It is just a way to other. And because of this othering, we now see that race as a concept and as a construct has now been used to justify exploitation, denigration, and decimation of groups of people throughout history. The notion of race might not necessarily be, the concept of race might not necessarily be there. It is a construct, but the consequences of race are real. So we can move to the next slide. Next slide. When we speak of the social construction of race, we are looking at it from the perspective that race is constructed from the social structures underpinned by power, culture, and ideology. You can't separate these concepts of power, culture, and ideology from the material realities that are then sustained within each society. And to confirm that this, race is a mediated construct within society, it is fluid. It changes within different times, and depending on who is leading that discussion. So, for example, the Nazi movement in the 20th century Germany regarded Jewish people as a race, but these are both, white. White-skinned peoples, the rationale for them, and put up a rationale for their mass extermination in that they were an inferior race that should be eliminated to avoid contaminating the superior Aryan races. That's one example to show it is fluid. Another example of fluidity is in the United States. During the early 19th and 20th centuries, immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Poland were widely regarded as being from races that were inferior to the more established white immigrants. But over time, again, the fluidity, the immigrants were subsumed into whiteness and came to benefit from the legal, political, and social advantages enjoyed by whites in the United States of America. And it's the same that we see in Africa, in South Africa, apartheid, the whole Anglo-Boer debate and the Anglo-Boer Wars, the whole fight for resources. Ultimately, when we speak about the social construction of race, we are looking at how social structures, including religion, including culture, are articulated to justify and sustain a power position of one particular race over the other. Next slide, please. When we speak of races, again, there are certain attributes that, when we speak of the social construction of races, there are certain attributes that characterize this social construction. Races are not biologically determined, but they are ascribed. So if you're born black, you're automatically born into a specific class. Those that have lived through apartheid understand this, and they have seen it in terms of this ascribed status, despite whatever intellectual cognitive qualities that you might have. Race is a relationship which translates itself into a focus on what race does and how it is enacted. So how do you engage across the racial divide? Race then becomes the wall that necessarily either includes or excludes and breeds discrimination in that regard. Next slide, please. But in terms of creating this social construct of race, we look at, again, sub-theoretical schools within that, including the ideational theory from Appia and the referential view again. Within the ideational theory, he says when we speak of race, what are the consequences that emerge from how we describe race? What are the thoughts and ideas that people have when they use the word race? And by using the word race, or by describing people according to a race, how do we classify, stratify the people in terms of access to certain, we've just heard of basic needs, and we're going to discuss that just now. How do we classify and explain the classist positions that emerge from this? So that's within the ideational theory school. From the referential theory school, what does race mean? And who is identified as race? What is identified as race? So what is it that what are the things that we speak of when we talk of race? And is this something that is tangible, that we can analyze and see? But within this concept from Appiah, what does it mean in terms of the theories or the social construction of race? These two, the ideational and the relational theories, allow for a deconstruction of the concept of race, which, if you look at how the world is shaping up now, it leads him to the conclusion that there is nothing in the world to which race refers, and therefore there is nothing which gives us a good causal explanation for any race talk. There's nothing that gives us a good causal explanation for any race talk. So scholars like Appiah are what you might term racial eliminativisms. Racial eliminativism scholars who, for them, there is nothing in the world that that can do what we need to do for us to talk about race. There's no physical scientific basis for a racial, for a social racial taxonomy, because it's only about the physical differences. And this school has been gaining traction for a time, because racial categories, and because they believe firmly that racial categories and identities are fictitious. So in terms of race is a fiction, but the ideologies, the underpinning principles, the cultural practices that inform or that justify the differences have material consequences. The issue of race itself is a fiction. But how people interpret, how people ascribe meaning to these differences is what then becomes quite important as the key giveaway for then justifying race and racial practices. We can move to the next slide. So when we look at race, we've agreed then that it's not a fixed unit of analysis. It's not. It's fluid. It changes depending on the time and the political agendas of that era. And we can also confirm that it is part and parcel of an ideological project for exploitation, othering. You dehumanize or you non-humanize other people in order to control and access resources and justify the different power dynamics. It is a technology of power. Race is a technology of power and necessitates the subjugation of others. We have seen this again in terms of the what has been happening in contemporary society, where diversity politics are now really becoming seminal issues. we look at the massive caravans from South America getting into the US, the efforts to cross the Mediterranean Sea, and the whole debates around migrants and migration in many parts of the world. But all these local and contemporary, local and global flows of inequality have resulted in a resurgence of conversations and discussions around race. But when you look again at who is being defined as the unwanted, who is being described as the discarded, it is always, unfortunately, it is always the non-white people. And this is a common trend all over the world. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we've heard from Professor Nichandama as when she spoke about Ubuntu, which was done very well. I'm just putting on this slide so that we see that Ubuntu within Sub-Saharan Africa. I just picked up a few. I know in Uganda they also then two or two is a common term that is a common way to describe a person in Swahili as well. But what is important here is it's a common lexicon in Sub-Saharan Africa. And because it's a common lexicon, next slide, it follows that there's a common practice that is associated with Ubuntu. And underpinning this practice is human relations. So there's a relational element, there's a respect for life, a sanctity of life, but ultimately it is people-centered. And all these things, and I'm saying characterizing and not defining, because you can't define it. There's no equivalent. No matter how much we try to explain Ubuntu, you need to be embedded in the context in which it is practiced, in the context in which the relational, communal practices around how the environmental, spiritual knowledges of the different communities are exercised. So we can only characterize Ubuntu. We can't describe it. Next slide, please. And because of this, as a phenomenon, or as a concept or as a philosophy, Ubuntu again is deep-rootedness in community. These are some of the qualities of Ubuntu, which have been described quite fairly. But what is important is it is a comprehensive worldview which assists communities to operate in a holistic and integrated manner for them to look, at the individual, the person becomes part of the community and espouses the community as an important indicator of their being. So Ubuntu as a worldview speaks of fantastic concepts of caring, sharing, respect, compassion, and all the other associated values which create a good and sustainable community well-being. Next slide, please. But what is the nexus between racism and Ubuntu? We have said race, and we have said that race is a fallacy, but because we are looking at how the practice that results in how we define racism informs the term. It results in us having multiple consequences of how we define race. And these become completely linked to what is in the society, informing how societies are framed, informing how societies are created. And because if we have said that the concept of race is scientifically indefensible, what then justifies this continued use? Why do we continue to use something that, or a concept or a term that is beyond science? And this is something I would want to open up again when we probably have the dialogue and the discussion. If we're saying race is scientifically indefensible, what justifies its continued use? One can speak of the material basis of power, but to what extent? If anything that we have seen, for example, with the Arab Spring, communities are able to rise up against this. We've seen it with the struggle for apartheid in South Africa. So why is race, if we are saying it's scientifically indefensible, why do we continue to use it? And how can we look at Ubuntu as an alternate, as a viable alternative, which we can use to justify the production and reproduction of alternative societies or alternative ideologies within societies? Next slide, please. So I'm going to suggest some, what I'm terming humanistic pathways, which are emerging from some of the characteristics of Ubuntu. The first one is that we need to recognize the self, recognition of self and others, which means there has to be a collaborative, or which is informed by the fact that there has to be a collaborative effort towards creating spaces for participation. I am, therefore I participate, therefore I am, as Desmond Tutu said. In other words, I see myself through others, therefore I feel that I belong. I think this is common everywhere, how we put all hands on deck when certain things are happening within our communities or during certain rituals, certain festivals. This is part and parcel of that. Building positive relationships. The whole concept around solidarity, cooperation, and sharing across the different ethnic groupings is quite important, because we all follow the same principle of cooperation and humanity even within our own groupings. Then getting communities to work cooperatively, which fosters group thinking and roles of individuals to the survival of the group. Embrace plurivocality, deepen theological engagements like this one at a micro level. But even at a macro level, we can deepen dialogical engagements in order to strengthen epistemic recovery, especially after the erasure that has happened from colonialism. Enable a culture of positive engagement, weave and amplify nodes of grassroots social cohesion for a shared moral discourse for positive actions, where we are basically looking at what is happening or how can we amplify knowledge repositories at the grassroots with the intention for either allowing for action as a first call, or for highlighting alternative ways of doing and alternative ways of thinking around specific social challenges or social issues within communities. Just a few days ago, I was looking at an article about some communities in the Eastern Cape that are now building their own roads, building their own bridges. Because for them, it is now time, they are tired of waiting. The cargo mentality is now being rethought. Communities are self-help is now becoming a common norm, and people are now really taking it upon themselves to improve the situations within their own communities. Then next slide, please. Added to these humanistic pathways, it's important that we also look at the role of community engagement. So and I'm happy that Professor Nichandama is there. We also call this paying forward. You said this in 2011, and I hope I'm quoting the right page and the right year. Community engagement programs are perceived to be pillars of social justice. The need to deconstruct race, the need to deconstruct racism is a social justice action. So community engagement can be a deliberate social justice action platform where we allow for the cross-pollination of common goods beyond narrow social divisions like race. What happens at the University of Venda, what happens at the University of the Free State, what happens at Rhodes, within our circles, we allow for lessons around how do we engage with our respective publics, our respective communities to really go beyond social divisions and allow for transformative opportunities or transformative possibilities. Community engagement is a social redress typology where really underrepresented voices, those voices which are on the margins, again, for lack of a better word, but where most action happens. If you look at where most of the knowledge is acquired, it's always acquired at the margins. Why? Because that's where you are at the core face of where survival strategies need to be devised, where these voices which they have nothing other than themselves. So a dialogical empowerment of these underrepresented voices will assist in redressing this through community engagement, will assist in redressing this marginalization and to a great extent racialized exclusion. CE, community engagement and knowledge co-production and ownership, where community engagement can actually be an enabler of knowledge interactions. And through community engagement initiatives, we allow for what we might term epistemological engagements by emphasizing collaboration and co-production across the stratification differences. And here I'm expanding it to include gender, to include class, beyond just race. And CE can be a critical enabler if done well. We've heard, I think Professor Magaiza mentioned this on service learning, where really students shift their stereotypes. I've seen it happen here, even within my own university, where they become advocates of pro-social decision-making, and they espouse this for the rest of their lives to become really productive citizens. And through community engagement, we can strengthen the architecture of participatory methodologies. But what is key within any participatory methodology is really not the specific thematic analysis that we do or the systemic, the issue of the various systems and methods that we apply. What is important is the iterative feedback loops to participating communities. When we give our communities information, when we give our communities, not give them information, but give them feedback on how they are doing, and we co-create these feedback mechanisms together, we are in a position to strengthen and also demystify and reduce some of the challenges around exclusion, around marginality, and therefore strengthen the quest for social justice, and with the intention, obviously, that we will chip away at race and racial exclusions. Next slide, please. Oh, some references. Last slide. Bye, Danke. Thank you so much.
Gray, thank you again, and really, we're so lucky to get so many thought-provoking presentations today. I'm really encouraged by the fact that we still have a big chunk of our initial attendees still in the call. It speaks volumes about the veracity of what our presenters have presented so far. Once more, I'll put out an open call for any questions, comments, inputs, responses. Please feel free to either use the hand raising option or to put your question or comment in the chat. I see Lihle. I'm hoping that your audio works a bit better this time. Please come in. Are you still there, Lihle?
Thank you, Chair. The function is working now.
Fantastic. Over to you.
Thank you. I just want to firstly thank Dr. Magaiza on the presentation. I think it was really, it had a lot of insight, especially on the race question and community engagement. I think mine is just to say, I think he asked an important question on how do we use Ubuntu as an alternative? And my response to that is, I think universities all around the world need to be intentional on using Ubuntu as a pedagogy. It must be embedded, Ubuntu as an alternative. So teaching at the level of the universities, they must be intentional about teaching about Ubuntu as a philosophy and as a way, as a philosophy as well. Sorry. I think also when I think about the question of cultivating humanity, I think it must be viewed as a process of deconstructing. I say this because I think there was a question that I wrote here. I asked myself, have higher education institutions escaped this colonial legacy of racism? And I think for this dialogue, it is important to also respond to that question. And I also think from my end that the cultivating of humanity is or should not be championed by a division or a department in higher institutions of learning, but must be championed by the university in itself, the whole entire university. We cannot have divisions that are champions of this humanity and have corridors in higher education institutions that are anti-human. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Lihle, thank you. Dr. Magaiza, are you happy to take another question before I invite you to share some inputs?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see there's a question in the chat from Miss Nikki Hayes. Nikki, if I could ask you to just speak to your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. It was really very inspiring talk. I'm just interested, and it's such a tricky thing to ask, but to hear what your thoughts are. You've so powerfully motivated for the unjustifiability of continuing to use the term race or the concept of race. And I'm just interested in how you see that interplaying with notions of people have been really upset about color blindness and the idea that when people do not supposedly see race, that's a negation of the pain and the historical legacies of apartheid and colonization and racism, so that we're not honoring those pains and how those two notions speak to each other. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Nikki. Dr. Magaiza.
Thank you, Program Director. Those are very complicated questions, but very relevant because they speak to our troubled times, if I might put it like that. I'll start with the last one just now on the legacy. You know, erasure of the past must never be allowed. I think that's the first. For me, that would be the departing premise. An erasure of the past must never be allowed. We must own it with the intention that we must never repeat it again. And how do we do that? Social justice becomes critical. Memory and heritage becomes important. But within that context, I'm very much aware of the debates around color blindness. Yes, it's within the broader construct of neoliberalism, especially around cultural education. But what would be important is, even as we speak of color blindness, we are not coming from the same pedestal, as in we are not on the same level of departure. If I was to maybe to put it more bluntly, there has been the historical privilege that white people come with across the globe. I started from the Enlightenment. That's around the 17th century. So including slavery, including colonialism, we can't erase those elements. So, and then all of a sudden talk about color blindness now. We must actually honor the past and try to redress it without causing a reverse racism. So there has to be a balanced view to it, but whatever policies, approaches, strategies that we put in place, these must actually result in equity and, in the long run, equality, but never erasure. That's what I can say on that one. Then I support the idea universities need to be intentional on using Ubuntu as a pedagogy. That should be non-negotiable. I think if we are to be Afrocentric within our perspectives, within how we look at our pedagogical and curricular constructs within higher education, then it becomes quite important that investments, and I want to repeat what Prof. Nichandanama said, investments in value education, value-based education become critical, but these should not just be values which are just there. I know, I am, therefore we are. It should be values which also speak to pragmatic outcomes for the communities, which we come from, for the communities surrounding us, and knowledge must be knowledge that transforms the societies around us, and maybe we reduce the whole concept of universities as ivory towers. And in the long run, we then begin to really have transformative institutions, engaged institutions, not just in name, but really engaged institutions with the realities of the communities surrounding them. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Dr. Magaiza. Any other questions from colleagues on the floor? Going through the participant list. I see there's another input from Usibulele Ngamdwini. Sibulele, I'm not sure if you'd like to speak to that yourself.
Hello, Butsaike. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Can you hear me?
Crystal clear, Sibulele.
All right. So my question is around the service learning point that Prof made. In my understanding, service learning should rather move away from the point of giving back to the community, but more of being in solidarity with the community, which is essential into colonizing and justice-orientated education. So my question is around how can we then differentiate between really being productive citizens through service learning and just fulfilling academic curriculum requirements?
Thanks, Sibulele. Dr. Magaiza, can I take 2 more questions before you respond?
Yes, please. That's fine. Thank you.
Fantastic. Dr. Parayachi, I see you've put your question in the chat. I love hearing people's voices. So I'd love to check if you'd like to speak to your question.
Hi, Sake. Thank you for that. And thank you, Gray, for some great insights into the whole issue of race, which we, of course, have grappled and continue to grapple with. But my question is, against that historical overview that you've given on racism, how cogent is the argument by white people who claim that they are victims of racism? Perhaps you want to just have a shot at that. Thanks. And thank you, Program Director.
Thank you. And then I see there's one more question from Mamela Gandhi. Mamela?
Thank you so much. My question is, that racism is there and, we can't hope it away. But the problem for me seems to be the hierarchy, the question of, the superiority of certain races as against, considering other races to be at a lower level. That's where the problem actually arises. If we look at, the normal settlements everywhere around the world, somehow people of the same race get together. It has been seen and perhaps it's not just race, it's religion, it's, a number of things that draws people together in, in various countries. But when that becomes a problem is when you begin to think that you are superior to others. So I just want to, ask whether that can be addressed by the speaker, the question of superiority and hierarchies of race. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Magaiza, 3 questions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Again, 3 very difficult questions.
Hi.
Again, 3 very difficult questions. I am going to give it my best shot. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm an expert in another field, but I dabble in this one. The one on service learning, as a start for productive service learning, I think if we look at the whole structure of the academy, the unfortunate thing is students need to get their marks. It is part and parcel of what I think, I forgot, there's a prof who spoke and then Professor Nachandame as well. The whole structure of the academy, where you need to get your marks, you need to show that you did something, your service learning engagement with the community, or whatever you're defining as the community, is time bound. If there are serious particular issues in any community, you can't do it in 6 weeks. I mean, you can't handle that. You can't provide a solution within 6 weeks. You can only do a scan of it. So what we actually need to do is to rethink and reimagine the scholarship of service learning itself, beyond maybe a paratrooper mentality. We send students in parachutes, then they come back out, a helicopter kind of thinking. It needs to go beyond that. And really, we embed and invest ourselves in our communities so that we really form viable and productive communities of practice, centered around the university itself, and not just a lecturer doing things, going out with his or her students and coming back. Yes, there's a pedagogical advantage for the students there, but there is a relational disadvantage for the university. So that's the first part. Then this very difficult question from Dr. Padiachi around, can white people think they are victims of racism? It's a very difficult question because I don't want to prejudice myself as when I answer that. But what is important is you can't, when we speak of advantage and privilege and differentiated material realities, it's really important to, let me start like this. If there are no policies to support access to resources in any country, in any nation, issues of exclusion, issues of marginality will remain. Policies that support, but however, the policies must be structured in such a way that they don't result in a reverse discrimination of what you're trying to solve. You don't reproduce the problem that you're trying to solve. But it's important to have policies of redress, and it mustn't be seen as politics of exclusion or policies of exclusion. I hope my 2 cents will try and answer that. Then the issue of hierarchies and superiority among the races. I mean, we mustn't put about the bush. Superiority is whiteness. But what is important, what we can ask is what supports it? I think that's where the issue is. What is it that supports the superiority of whiteness? At a global level, is it military power? Is it the military industrial complex? Is it the ability to control material and financial resources, material and financial flows across the whole world that maintains that superiority? Is it the fact that resources are found, say, for example, in the developing global south or in the global south, but the buyer of those resources decides on the price? This is one of the classic cases where it's only the buyer is the one who says, I'll buy your gold at $500 US, even if you want to sell it at 1,000. But when we buy their commodities, the value-added commodities, we don't decide on the price. It's them who decide on the price. So these unequal power relations, what is it that supports it? We need to unpack and unlock systems that justify inequality. And that means also institutions that justify inequality. That is at an overt global level. But at a micro level, where we encounter these microaggressions of superiority, of exclusion, of marginality, there has to be, and this is where community engagement becomes critical. We need to be advocates of a different type of relationality in our communities. There is nothing wrong with a specific community wanting to stay alone. But even if you want to stay alone, you must not exclude those who want to stay in that community with you. So if you are if you are in Orania, you cannot exclude other people wanting to buy homes in Orania. It mustn't be that kind of situation. But what is important for me in terms of the superiority program director is what is it that supports it? And that is what we need to unlock.
Dr. Magaiza. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for the important inputs. Again, I repeat, some of these questions must continue and echo in our minds throughout. And again, just for everyone to know, there will be access to the recording and the presentation at the end of the dialogue, should you require it.